So, who would like to kick off with questions or comments? Plenty of time.
What is the narrative then? You talk a lot about the means disseminating it, but what is the narrative? What is the story?
What, in terms of where I think we need to get to?
Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I don't know very much. I don't care that I don't know that much, really. I think politics is all about means, actually, because means always shape ends, and we've always ended up in problems when we've ended up in blueprints. I'm not saying you're suggesting that for a minute, but I think that's a bit of a worry. I think the values, the way we behave with each other, what we think about each other, the way that we empathise, the way that we relate to each other on our journey towards, the good society, and a friend of mine who lives locally, in Leeds, Professor Zygmunt Bauman, who was at the Leeds University, he always says a good society is one that always knows it's not good enough. And I think that's exactly right. That it's all about the journey. You know this is not good enough, that inequality exists, that the destruction of the planet exists, so you make it better. And that's good enough for me. That's what I need to drive me on. And I know the stuff about that is that we create the spaces in which people can do things for themselves, can join up together, can make it happen themselves. To me, it's almost entirely about process and not ends. Actually, I'm quite worried about ends. I'm worried. I'm interested in. I've got a broad set of values. I believe in a more equal, democratic, and sustainable world. Are we becoming more democratic, equal, and sustainable? How do we make that happen? And how do we come together? And how do we treat each other? And how do we relate to each other? That's everything to me.
The problem is, of course, is that the means can be used by those whose ends are, however you define your ends, are not the same. The same tools are available to the neoliberals, the capitalists.
They are.
And maybe they shout louder.
No, well, maybe they do. And I think you're absolutely right that the technology itself is neutral in a sense of it has no morality. But what I'm trying to suggest is that it lends itself to a bigger, broader, wider, flatter conversation. Now that doesn't mean to say that UKIP can't use it, but if your politics is essentially about trusting people and believing in people to make the world better themselves together, then anything that brings in more people and gives them a voice and gives them connections seems to me self-evidently better. Now, of course, UKIP can do that as well, or the corporations can do that, but it gives us the possibility to do it, and I haven't seen us with the possibility to do something for a long time, right? So I'm suggesting this is maybe it's a level playing field. Okay, that's better than not having a level playing field. So even if that's the best we've got, it's better than it's been for a long time. And I think that's a huge opportunity for us to fight, struggle on a level playing field. And the other thing we've got in our locker is that we're right and they're wrong, right? So a level playing field and us being right and having morality and the view of the human condition and human nature and the optimism and the hope, we may be able to do something.
Okay. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah.
Sorry, if people could just say your first name, where you're from, if you're from anywhere.
My name's Alan Brockett. I think most people know me in one capacity or another. I agreed with most of what you said. I thought you put it excellently. And what particularly impressed me was use of two words, which was love and compassion, because when was the last time that anybody heard anybody talking about politics and included those terms? And I think this is the absolute crux of what I want to achieve, and I think what you were trying to say, that we need a new ethic. I've said that before at meetings at this club. What we need to get back to is the early concept of socialism, which was fellowship. And we've got to, in all those relationships in society and with each other, we have to try and prefigure the kind of society which we want to achieve. And that, as I said, does require this new ethic. And we've got to be able to speak about love and compassion, because that is what differentiates us from the neoliberals, from the conservatives. They might talk about freedom and all this sort of stuff, but you very rarely hear anybody talking about love and compassion. And we've got to put that at the centre of the ethics and vision of a new society. And that can only be done if we make, this is perhaps where we differentiate a bit, this can only be done if we make a complete break from the old means. And I think that means the old party system and Parliament. We've got to expose them for the systems of corruption which they are. And we've got to get away from them entirely. And I've said that before at meetings at this club. And until we do that, until we make that break and talk about politics in its real sense, going back to the ancient Greek meaning of the word politics, as a relationship between people in the state, and I don't think we're going to re-engage people with any sort of political vision. So basically, what's your ideas on that, please?
In one sentence.
Yeah, look, we're just echoing each other. Of course, it's got to be moral, it's got to be ethical. When we look into the eyes of others, we see ourselves not some other distant, strange, other being. We are them. We can't stop ourselves being social. We are, just DNA-driven social beings who have to be with each other, and we have a political system and an economic set of institutions which try and drive us apart and commodify us and individualise us and set against each other, and we fight that all the time. We fight against that because we are innately social. We have an innate empathy with each other, and we have to build institutions which drive that together. Mrs. Thatcher said, the economy is the means, the goal is to change the soul. She knew this, right? She knew that we love each other, right? She absolutely understood that. And she wanted to use privatisation and all the rest of it to drive us apart, to stop us being what we can and should be. And we have to do the opposite of that. We have to build institutions which bring people together, which encourage compassion, which encourage love, which encourage cooperation. And bring out the best in people. That doesn't mean to say that we can't be selfish and individualistic as well. We clearly can be, but we should bring out and build the best in each other. And completely, as you said, we have to prefigure what the good society is. We haven't got to wait for someone to do it for us. We haven't got to wait for the revolution. We can do it now, in this room, in our lives, in our communities, in our parties or in our non-parties. We can be the change we wish to see in the world. And I think we make the good society happen now, and we have to take on that responsibility of doing it now.
Yeah. Anybody want to comment on that? The importance of love and compassion and working together cooperatively. Because one of the things that strikes me about conventional left politics, including the Labour Party, is how incredibly tribal we are and how attached we are to labels. So anybody who's Liberal, Tory, let alone UKIP, are the devil. And so we have this sort of moral high ground. And actually, when you talk to people on maybe things that aren't political with a large P, we've often got a lot more in common than we may think. Anyone over here perhaps who's not?
I could say something, but I'm not going to say anything until the woman's asked the question. Because I'm going to be the first bloke in the room.
Oh, I say.
You don't want to put any pressure on anyone.
Is there any tea? No. I was wondering, all right, just to free Tim up.
I've already introduced you.
I'm now. I do, though, I have a notion that there are sides, and one of the things I struggle with is when people don't get that there are sides in battles, and that seems to work against the notion of love and compassion. Looking at the Orgreave poster,
Yeah.
or nowhere in particular. And I don't know how we work that one out.
It's something I've been struggling with and thinking about and working my way through, because I've spent all of those 35 years, or most of them, thinking that what you had to do in politics was build a bigger army than their army, and then your army beats their army. And in the last few years, I've begun to recoil from that and thinking that actually I don't want to win wars, because if you think you're winning wars, you're not really. You're just sowing the seeds of the next battle. And I think if you start to look at people like Gandhi, Mandela and others, they didn't, I don't think they thought, I'm not saying they were all completely successful or anything like that, but see, if you believe in this thing that everyone has the capacity to be a wonderful human being, right, okay, then you believe that. And you don't then have enemies that you want to destroy. You have people that you want to have a conversation with and a dialogue with, and to bring them round to your way of thinking. And unless you approach them in that way, it's not going to happen, and you'll just have this continual kind of battle between one side or the other. Now, I know that is problematic because there are some very rich people with a lot of power who wield it in very horrible, authoritarian, selfish ways. But I think, again, it goes back to that notion of like showing that there is a better way of doing things. It doesn't mean to say you've got to be soft and soppy and hippie-like. It does mean that you've got to speak to people and do things and operate in a way that you believe that everyone can be part of a good society, that everyone has the capacity to be loving and compassionate and empathetic and all of that. So I have to put my hand up and admit to becoming a bit more hippie-ish like, and then definitely, as I think Paul was suggesting, beginning to move away from the notion that, you know, that only the people in your tribe have the sole answers, and that anyone who isn't in your tribe must by definition be standing in your way of gaining the power to do the things. So just really quickly, just to tell you about the organisation that I'm amazingly fortunate enough to be the chair of, Compass. We started within the Labour Party 10 years ago, effectively in the Labour Party. You really had to be a member of the Labour Party to be a member of Compass. And then we just started finding that there were people in the Labour Party we've strongly disagreed with. We obviously still love them, but we strongly disagreed with them. You know, very neoliberal types. And there were people outside the Labour Party, like Caroline Lucas in the Greens, and even some, you know, social liberals, you know, all sorts of people that we very strongly agreed with. And somehow we were letting Peter Mandelson into our organisation who could vote and have a voice, and Caroline Lucas couldn't. And that increasingly seemed to become madness. I suppose if you had a view that just being in the Labour Party and getting the Labour Party elected into power and it doing the thing was the only way to do politics, you would have kept on that route. But we started going, actually that's not, even if you made that happen, it's not enough. You need this wave. You need all of these alliances and all of these people talking to each other and thinking and joining up and sharing and collaborating. And our organisation took a vote and we changed our rules and said it doesn't matter what party you're in, as long as you believe in the good society values of equality, sustainability and democracy. And so that's a big transformation for an organisation to say the Labour Party isn't the only thing. It's really important, it really matters, but it isn't the only thing. There are other things that matter as well. And that's kind of defined us culturally, and we're so much richer because we've got, you know, Reds and Greens and left-wing Liberals and UK Uncut and all sorts of people. We see politics in a really rich, interesting way now that I would never go back to, and I don't think the country's going to go back to either. It doesn't mean to say those parties don't matter, they do, and the Labour Party really matters, and I'm a member of the Labour Party, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be so much more than that to do the things that we want to do.
Thanks, Neal.
Tim, your turn.
I had a beautifully drafted question all about Compass's All On Board campaign about publicly owned transport, which was my way in for plugging a couple of events. But what the hell, I'm going to tear that up because I disagree so strongly with what you said. What you've actually done, and do correct me if I'm wrong on this, is you've given up on the top. You've given up on power. And what you've said is, we've lost that, we haven't got a chance of that, so let's work from the bottom up and let's have really rich, positive, meanful interactions with each other. Which is basically like a form of anarchism, and I mean that as a compliment. I mean, the closest club, and it's not that close, but the closest club locally to this is the 1 in 12 club, which is amazing. And I've worked with anarchists on a number of projects. Their attitude and their temperament and the way their independence and initiative is absolutely phenomenal. But I profoundly disagree with their view, which is basically giving up on the idea of top-down government. Now, if you take, for example, the environmental movement, you're absolutely right that bottom-up movements are fantastic. The Transition Town movement is fantastic. Little community cooperatives are fantastic. Growing schemes are fantastic. All those other things are absolutely amazing. But you are not denying them in order to also believe that you need to have top-down government decisions. And not just that within a nation, but between nations. Huge decisions that are made And if you put all your faith in bottom-up community projects, though they are very, very important, if you put all your faith in them and give up on campaigning on things like TTIP, then all those positive benefits that are going to be gained are going to be worse than neutralised, because the corporations and the governments will dictate what happens to your lives. It's not one or the other.
Yes.
We need both.
Well, I've completely given you the wrong impression of where I am, because I'm exactly in that space, right? I suppose I was emphasising one bit of our journey and one bit about what our vista and landscape was, because we recall from just being in the centre of formal party establishment, Westminster politics, and then see all of this life and all of this energy, which I think is part of the zeitgeist, part of the wave, which I then think the bit at the centre has to respond to and has to change itself to begin to do. And so my organisation, one, others as well, the season that was completely in between the sort of frustration of Westminster politics, but the possibility of it, and the beauty of all of this grassroots bottom-up stuff, but we see completely the limitations of where that can go. And so the job is completely, as you said, to bring those two things together, the kind of vertical and the horizontal. And we talk about politics at an angle. How do you get the vertical ones to bend, to recognise they've got to change and open themselves up and not be so tribal, and see politics and all of the legitimacy and the resource and the power they have in order to ensure that more of that grassroots bottom-up stuff happens. So politics not as policy, but politics as platform building for people to do stuff for themselves. And just look at, the biggest thing that's happened in the last year in British politics, maybe the biggest thing that's happened in a long time in British politics, is what happened in Scotland. That required a political party to gain control of the state, the Scottish state, and have the legitimacy and the authority to call a referendum, which only it could do, it could only happen that way, which then unlocks and unleashes this tsunami of political, conversation, debate, flowering of all sorts of different groups and energies and whatever else. So that seems to me the perfect example of the top down and the bottom up feeding off of each other and needing each other to make something happen. And I think it's in the link between the two and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the two that I think we can begin to see the potential of a transformative politics. And it's only the link between the two. It isn't just going to come from, campaigning from the bottom up, as beautiful and wonderful as important that is. I go to an organisation, they say, we're changing the world, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, and you think that's beautiful and wonderful, but come on, the planet's burning, the poor are getting poorer, how can we move that and do that faster? Or the blooming politicians who think it's all about them and their ego and what they can do, and join those two things up, open all of those out, get the people of the grassroots to understand that party politics matters, it's really important, and get the people at the top to recognise that all of the grassroots stuff is really important and what they can do. It's definitely both of those things, so I apologise if I gave you the wrong view of where we're at.
Yeah, I could just use the chair's privilege as well and add to that. I'm enough of an old Marxist to remember it was Marx or maybe Lenin who cautioned against the working class laying hold of the existing state apparatus and try and use it for your own benefit. It doesn't work. Now, okay, rather rigid, old-fashioned language, admittedly, but there's a big element of truth in that, and sort of successive generations of Labour politicians have become intoxicated by the power of Westminster. And I think the great thing about Scotland was that it would, if it had voted yes, it would have been massively disruptive to the British state, and I think that would have been a good thing actually. It would have meant taking power out of Westminster, it would have opened the door to potential regional devolution as well, so there would be quite a significant change in the British state. There would still have been a state there, but potentially it would have been able to be used for more progressive purposes. And I think this problem of Whitehall and Westminster, it really does need breaking up, and I think notwithstanding the no vote, I think Scotland has changed everything. I think there are big opportunities there to really sort of change the nature of Britain for the better. It's not about an anarchist utopia. I think any good anarchist would say there's no such thing. It is about the process. It's about moving towards it and taking power out of the centre and giving it to people. I think where we would agree with is that you can't just rely on the grassroots importing all that is. But one of the responsibilities, I would say, of higher government, whether it's regional or national, should actually be finding ways to empower people at whatever the most appropriate level might be, and that could be at the very local level. Anyway, shut up. Phil.
Phil Wood. Yeah, well, I guess we're saying that representative democracy peaked, that it's past its peak, but it's not going away anytime soon. It's going to have a long tail.
Yeah.
And space is going to be created for deliberative budgeting, participative democracy and all of that. But at the moment, I don't see it creating anything kind of coherent, and I don't feel the passion or the radicalism in particularly local government to meld all of those together. And what gives me confidence that we can find it is going abroad to somewhere like Latin America, or I've just been privileged to meet the mayor and the local council in Reykjavik. Now these are really radical people who at the same time are working on the basis of a voting democracy, but are working with all kinds of other things as well. Bottom up, the Pirate Party are part of the government in Reykjavik now. In Latin America, they're really, really radical, and they're working through, the mayoral system. They've got really charismatic, strong leaders, in the traditional mould. But those leaders are creating space for bottom up. And I suppose my question is, it's happening in Latin America because they've been screwed over for a century. It's happening in Iceland because they hit the floor and couldn't go down anymore. My question is, do we have to go through that level of pain before we can create that passion?
Yeah, maybe. And it's happening in Spain with Podemos, who were formed in March early this year and now leading in the polls, come out of the anti-austerity movements in Spain. Really interesting. It's obviously happening in Greece with Syriza, who've completely overtaken this traditional social democratic party, and now look like they could form, the next government in Greece. We've seen what's happened, to a lesser extent, but an important extent with the SNP in Scotland. So it's happening in all sorts of places. Do we have to go through something? Maybe. But I tell you what, it's very likely to be another financial crash. Are we better prepared for that now? I'm not sure if we are, but we need to be. Will there be more floods? Will they, come up higher on the banks of the home counties? Now things are going to keep happening, right? They will, and history keeps moving and changing and threatening and providing opportunities. Are we better intellectually and organisationally to make the most of that? Right? Mark said we make history, but not in conditions of our own choosing. Right? So we can make history. What the conditions are big cultural, financial, blah, blah, blah. But we can make things happen. We have to have the intellectual and organisational capacity to make those things happen. That's all we can do, right? All we can do is come to meetings, join up, write stuff, think about stuff, behave in ways as people, prepare ourselves for what's going to happen and make the most of it. That's all we can do. I just want to be ready for when that happens. And you don't know when it's going to hit. Like yesterday, 9th of November was the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. You'd ask anyone in Berlin on the 8th of November 1989, would the Berlin Wall fall tomorrow? We don't know, right? And I look at our political system and I always think of the Berlin Wall, right? No moral underpinnings for it whatsoever anymore, it seems to me, of elites, of people who are disconnected, of no legitimacy, people bubbling up all over the place, doing other things. It will, at some stage, it will collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Now, it could be, you're right, it's a long tail thing, and it could go on for a long time, and that doesn't mean to say that bad things, it's not necessarily good things, it could be UKIP, as opposed to something progressive, but only if we allow it to be. And you said about power and power being at the top. Power is at the top, but power is in us. Unless we realise how powerful we are as people to organise, and particularly now because of the blooming internet and who we can connect to and who we can think with and who we can join up with and make things happen, we are incredibly powerful, right? And they don't want us to think we are. And I think we're becoming potentially more powerful. and maybe we'll be able to make something better happen sooner than we think.
Okay, I've got several people indicating. Chap there, and then Brendan, Vicky, and Julian. So I don't know your name.
No, I'm Peter. I actually come over from Glossop, and last night I was at a social event at Glossop Labour Club, which is not quite as old as this place, but fairly old. And although it still calls itself a Labour Club, it's effectively like this. It's a red-green club, you know. So
Yeah,
just to mention that, I was really impressed with listening to Neil, and particularly when he had the chance to finish off at the end about linking the horizontal and the vertical, because I think that was an important point. He also mentioned tribalism, and I just wanted to say something about that, and basically whether we can actually start to talk about, I think, a new tribal problem on the left. There's a new tribe on the left. It's called the Green Party. I'm a member of the Green Party, and you know, and we're growing rapidly, and people are very enthusiastic, and people in the Green Party are virulently anti-Labour. You know, and I've chosen to give myself the task of trying to temper a bit of that, and actually try to raise the argument: do we actually want a Tory government back in because the Greens get 6 or 7% in the polls, which looks like it could happen, and it could happen in 400 constituencies. And I was just wondering whether there's any of that sentiment within the Labour Party to actually recognise that actually that there needs to be a bridge and some kind of cooperation with people in the Greens. It's not going to happen at the top. It's not going to happen at the top of the Green Party. It's certainly not going to happen at the top of the Labour Party. But you know, I understand that one of the most tribal political cultures is in Brighton, where Caroline's hoping to get re-elected. Where she got elected first time round with just 30% of the polls. Ironically, benefited from first past the post. But in Brighton, there's a virulent hostility towards Caroline from the Labour Party, which is a particularly tribal outfit. So I don't know, Neil, whether you come on record and say we shouldn't be contesting that seat. Right?
And I completely agree with all of that, and that's one of the reasons why we changed our organisation.
Yeah, I'm a Compass Green, by the way.
Thank you. And that's why we benefited from an influx of lots of other, members of the Green Party, to come and join on an equal standing. And we have a problem with our electoral system, which forces that kind of rabid tribalism, that it's one thing or the other. And the only thing that I am a member of the Labour Party. I carry my Labour Party card very lightly, I have to say. And I always try and think of it from both sides. So, of course, I want Caroline Lucas to be, because that's a good thing for British politics. Fracking, page 3, all the things that she does so brilliantly. And Labour should, we can't do much. Actually, we can't do much about because the Labour Party in Brighton is awful. But actually, we ought to be able to encourage the Labour Party nationally to say, look, why don't you just not send them any money or any members of the shadow cabinet if the Greens don't put any money or any resources into Norwich South, right? Norwich South, the Labour candidate there, a guy called Clive Lewis, is brilliant. He's egalitarian and he's green and he's fantastic. All the Green Party will do there is stop him becoming, the next, a very good Labour. So, is there something we could do about that stuff within a rotten system and make the best of that? And can people like us from different parties come together as much as we can and see that actually I don't have two heads and neither do you, and you want the same things as me, and can we have that conversation and begin to share and broaden out, and and can we do that, and can we move to a system of proportional representation as soon as possible? And I think that actually, is the outcome of this election is going to be horrible. Obviously, we're not going to get single party strong government, which first past the post is supposed to deliver. And people are softening up in Labour to this. They're beginning to recognise that the genie isn't going back in the bottle. They're going to have to think about this. I don't know how many coalition governments it's going to take to force that to happen, but the world isn't going back to 1951. Absolutely. And we're going to have to push it, and we're going to have to work together, both for seats, for negotiations potentially after the Friday, to begin to talk to each other and not allow the tribalists to say, over my dead body will we talk to the Liberals or the Greens or anybody else. But we're going to have to make this happen, and I think we can, and I think it's what the country wants. It's with the direction of travel, of our culture, of the way things are going. So, let's make all of those things happen.
Okay, we've got Brendan, then Vicky, and you.
My question relates a bit to that and to alliances. I put my hand up when you talked about Scotland because that was a bit I wanted to question. Of course, I agree with Paul about the way it's brought regional devolution back onto the agenda, and I agree with you. Of course, there was much that was inspiring about what happened there, but I wonder if we're seeing it through rose-tinted spectacles. I mean, alongside the rejection of neoliberalism, alongside the civic nationalism, there was a lot of ethnic nationalism, there was a lot of cultural nationalism. I was talking to somebody recently who was involved in the campaign. He said, to win next time, that's what we'll emphasise, the Scottish nationalism, the Anglophobic element. So, I mean, that was there. And even as far as Liberals are concerned, I mean, can you dismiss what happens in terms of the coalition over the last 4 or 5 years? Or that in this area, I've talked about this here before, there's a long tradition of Tory-Liberal pacts. You can sometimes take a rose-tinted view of Liberals as well.
Look, on Scotland, I suppose you talk to the people you want to talk to, and you see the people that you know and you're connected with. I saw people that, Paul was discussing earlier with a small group of us, that essentially saw, a better route to a decent social democracy through independence than they did through the union. And I can't blame them for that. If you've got a union that's dominated by the city and Rupert Murdoch, how are you going to do social democracy? And I didn't have a vote, but if I had a vote, I would have voted yes. And I think that would have been good for Scotland, and it would have been good for what remained of the United Kingdom, because we may have had a better country on our borders to act as a light to follow and to be guided by. I didn't see much kind of, raw, nationalism. And I'd be very surprised if the SNP went down that route. That doesn't seem to be the sort of politics of Nicola Sturgeon to me, who seems to be more social democratic than Salmon. And they've got all of these, the predominant conversation in the Yes that I saw, the 10,000 people that turned up for the Radical Independence conferences, the people involved in the Commonweal, the Women for Independence, the National Collective, the cultural element of it. This was all essentially a kind of modern form of social democracy. I'm not saying there aren't kind of Tart and Tory people around, but I think they're becoming more marginal, as opposed to more mainstream. And I think that's a good thing. And as far as I went to the Liberal Democrat, I always go and speak at the Liberal Democrat conference. And maybe because I go and talk to and appeal to the social liberal wing, it's like the people in this room. It's absolutely no different, right? I think we breathe the same air, we feel the same stuff. There are orange bookers who are neoliberal, just like there are there are neoliberals in the Labour Party, and there's some pretty odd people in the Green Party, to be honest, as well. Who are very much on the kind of small C conservative, protectionist, wing.
There's less of them.
Yeah, maybe, but there are some of them. I think we've just got to get out of this kind of blinkered. I'm not saying anyone here is saying this, or not, but there is good everywhere. Let's join up the good everywhere and see the best in people, and not the worst. And I think out of that, something better will happen.
Vicky.
My name's Vicky Newton. I'm not sure really what I want to say to you, because it seems to me that the various layers of what we're talking about. You've painted a landscape, and you've also described a vision that could sit on that landscape.
Right.
But
I didn't mean to. It's good if I did do that. I'm pressing myself.
it's not an accusation.
No, I know. I was mucking around.
But one of the things that are coming through for me are things about our behaviours, and our behaviours are moral positions that we take, and so our interactions with people, our political actions, whether they are members of a party or not, or whether we are.
Yeah.
And so I think some of these people in this room have been involved in quite strong political activities over things that have had an impact or will have an impact on local communities. And so one of the things that confuses me is how much the institutions, the structures of democracy that we have, local government, constituencies, all that sort of stuff, actually it seems to be operating on one level which we don't have much influence over anymore, because the local activism is operating in a different way, and it's also operating, as you say, in the privacy of our homes. And Paul and I were, were reviewed as part of an Observer article where the guy came and had a look at the Kern Valley as an alternative. You might have seen.
Julian.
Yeah, Julie.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about was the collectivism. This
Yeah.
idea of 38 degrees. 13 million people have, will vote with their bars.
Yeah.
And that influences things on a global scale.
Yeah.
Change.org, all these things.
Yeah.
Every day, I imagine people are getting what I'm
Yeah.
getting, 6 or 7 important campaigns that inform you of where the hurt is,
Yeah.
and are full of wonderful links.
Yeah.
To help you
Yeah.
be informed, and it's being informed
Yeah.
so that those arguments can be made, sometimes at a very local level in the shop, sometimes with a neighbour. And so I suppose I might be sort of rambling about this, but I think that we have to believe that the relationships that we have will influence people, and that our job is to be informed citizens, so that we can influence in any way, including ourselves.
Yeah.
And just to finish, the love and the compassion and all those things, I think, it makes us, it creates a dynamic in our lives, because we have to deal with the enemies. We have to we have to deal with those people that will challenge us, and we have to, in a way, fight the thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
it's the commitment to the ideas and the vision and the behaviours that I find is the new politics.
Yeah. And I think, look, to me, the big things that happen, the big important things like the end of apartheid or gay rights, or same-sex marriage, these things happen through, they end up happening through acts of parliament, but actually it's all the stuff before that matters. The conversations in the shop, over the garden fence, at the school gate. It's the cultural small bits that just begin to make, one side look a bit ridiculous, a bit old-fashioned, a bit out of date, And that's because we carry it, as you said it much better than me, we carry all this stuff with us, and we can make things happen all the time and build things up, through those individual myriad connections. And we have to be able to do that by walking around as we've always done, but we can do it in all sorts of other connected ways as well, online as well as offline, and they're both important and they both matter. So I'm just waffling around and saying I agree completely with what you said.
Right, got Julian, then Freddie, and then Pam.
Okay, I'm Julian from Manchester. So I'm glad that saw that was from the other side of the pen, aren't I? Though I'm actually a Yorkshireman myself. When I came to Manchester, I went to Manchester in 1985, and my first job to do then, along with a whole bundle of voluntary organisations and not-profits and the rest of it, was to try to stop Margaret Thatcher abolishing the Greater Manchester Council and the the GLC, because that was a space that we used to try and do some of the prefigurative stuff. And we lost, and that was my 1979 though. The miners' strike and the loss of the GLC was the moment when I thought that it's all changed. Blow me, 30 years on, George Osborne's giving it back to us. Devo Mank, part of the. You may have noticed, that there's some deals being done amongst the various sort of other 10 councils of the old Greater Manchester County Council to get what, on the face of it, looks like a lovely piece of devolution. Now, I suppose I really don't know. The question I want to ask, though, is in terms of the top-down, bottom-up. What do we do about that? Because part of me says, I don't trust this one little bit because there's no money here. So how are we just going to be able to sort of, manage our decline and manage our own poverty and shut up? Or is it going to open up a realistic space for us to do the prefigurative things? Is it going to help protect some of that sort of, all the activity of the community groups and the rest of it? Can we get back some of our youth clubs that have all been closed? And, so as a practical issue, which tries to sort of bring together sort of the top-down power and what we might be doing out there, what would you suggest we do? Well, we being, the beyond the fragment sort of
no, I completely understand. And just to I don't think we lost. I don't think we didn't lose in terms of the GLC or whatever. The seeds that it set down and the practices and the people you know, the Robbie Murrays and the Hilary Wainwrights and the people that have continued all of those experiments and all of that thinking and learned all of those lessons, you know, and we have to go back and dig some of that stuff up, you know, Livingston and all of that were, you know, termed, you know, have become sort of pejorative terms. Actually, they were fantastic experiments in local empowerment. And some of that was about money, some of that was about just giving community groups and people chunks of money and going, go away and do it, and some of it worked and some of it didn't, and how do you learn the lessons of all of that? I don't know enough about the details of what Osborne's done, but I think you take it and say yes and, you take it and say yes but, you know, and you build on it, and there's a, you know, they're not brilliant, they're not the best people in the world, but there's a group of, you know, in the north certainly, of Labour-led authorities, you know, from Nottingham to to Newcastle, from Liverpool to Manchester to Oldham. There's some actually pretty competent people running these things. I was a bit taken aback by the picture of them standing with Osborne. It was all men. It was all of the authorities around Manchester were all men. Every single anyway. But there is a competence and a confidence. Sadly, some of these people I know, and sadly some of them think it probably wouldn't make much difference if there was a Labour government next or a Conservative government, in terms of the amount of resources and power that they would be given, because Labour's quite a reluctant giver away. It's quite a hoarder of stuff, you know. In private, they're quite, you know, I should say this. In private, they're quite, you know, sanguine about what the possibilities are. But this kind of centripetal forces, throwing things out to the edges, you know, that's beginning to happen, and I think that's opening up all sorts of opportunities which we grasp, we take, you know, we don't just say Osborne's, well, we might say whatever we like about Osborne, but you know, we move on and we demand more, and we don't just demand more, we make more happen through those increasing powers, and I think that's very interesting. I think it's very exciting, you know, and the more when power is near people, it's much better, isn't it? When you can, you know, hold people to account and use it and channel it and join it up, you know, you can do a lot of that more locally and more regionally. It's much easier to do, and I think that was one of the drivers of Scotland, that, you know, having in Edinburgh was much better than London. So I think it's generally a good move, and I think we take it, we bank it, and we ask for more.
Yeah, I can't resist chipping in as a former, very short-lived councillor on Kirklees and seeing how power works. I think the whole trend towards combined authorities and mayors is profoundly anti-democratic. I agree that when there is a mayoral election, yeah, challenge it and fight it, but I think don't be under any illusions. I think you can't impose democracy, although what is being imposed is a very qualified form of democracy. It'll be one person, almost certainly a bloke from the sort of traditional Labour establishment in Greater Manchester, almost certainly Richard Leese. You can see it now, can't you? So I think the real alternative is directly elected regional government, which was really, that's what the GMC, Greater Manchester County Council, was in a way. It was sort of sub-regional. The world's moved on since then. I'd say we need bigger regions, but taking power from the centre rather than taking power from the local level, which is what these combined authorities and this mayor will do, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think you've got to engage and say, demand more. And sure. Freddie.
Yeah, Freddie from Greenhill College, yeah. You were talking a lot about sort of involving people, like both from the top as it were, like in parties, and then obviously from like, you know, more local, like pressure group type thing. But especially when you consider the fact that people, especially sort of people my age, just seem to be like increasingly politically sort of apathetic, then do you think part of like the solution, as it were, is to, like, you know, using new media and stuff, is to get people more engaged in politics? And if so, sort of how?
Well, look, Freddie, you know much more about whether young people are apathetic or not. Again, we see what we see, and we work in circles that we work in. You know, how many of those young people in Scotland were amongst the 97% who registered to vote, and then the 84% who actually voted? And my God, was I taken back by the 16-year-olds on television in Scotland, you know, and how confident they were and how articulate. you know, and how the giving the responsibility of making an important decision had obviously weighed on their young shoulders, and they thought about it, they could talk about it, and they could debate it. You know, I don't buy the thing that young people are apathetic. They've got different interests and they've got different ways of expressing themselves. But my God, my sons are a little bit older than you. They have a confidence and an awareness, they have a voice, they're on the internet, they're talking, they're saying, they're joining up, they're speaking in a way that, you know, that I think creates spaces and places for people to, you know, be, you know, aware, political, active, you know, engaged. So I don't think young people are necessarily any less, you know, apathetic as such. They're not going to join formal party, you know, politics. They might, some of them might join the Greens, and I hope they do. You know, and some of them might be joining the SNP. They're not going to join the Labour Party, or not many of them really. You know, because it's not something where you can have a voice and have a say, and where you're regarded, and you know, all the rest of it. And God, it's got to change to be able to bring in, you know, and to absorb that energy and that idealism, and you know, and that sense of having a future. And I hope it can do that. But I don't think young people, you know, take an institution like UK Uncut, an institution, it's not an institution, you know, a group of people who just sat around in a pub for a while and thought, we don't like austerity, let's do something about it, you know, and let's go and turn the, you know, the Boots, you know, because they don't pay their corporation tax, into a creche, you know, that's going to be closed because they don't pay their corporation tax, or go to Vodafone, you know, and turn it into a library because the library is going to be shut, and just use that sense of imagination and connection, and you know, and don't wait for someone to do it. And I think that's happening all over the place in all sorts of ways. So I'm not sure they're necessarily apathetic. We just need to find a way of doing politics in a way that I think that is meaningful for them.
Yeah, what do you think, Freddie, yourself?
I tend to agree. Because I mean, like, obviously, like, when it comes to like agreeing at college, the people I interact with in politics are a bit weird, because we also study politics, which is puts us in like the minority.
Yeah.
But like, if you talk to people about it, then they're generally interested. I think they get bored by sort of the more mundane, sort of constitutional stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But I think
they can spot fraudsters, can't they? They can spot when, like all of us, we can spot when people are spinning a line.
I think you're very right about saying most of them will be more likely to join, say, the Green Party rather than Labour. Like, they just find Labour boring and the Conservatives boring.
Yeah.
And, you know, even the Lib Dems boring. I think the only two parties that ever attract anybody are sort of UKIP, not even because they follow UKIP's ideals, just they're doing something.
Yeah.
And the Greens as well. But I agree with you, they're not apathetic as it were.
Yeah.
It's more just, they prefer sort of more direct things.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Pam, then Dave.
Hi, my name's Pam Brooke. I just want to pick up on a couple of things. One that Victoria said, and which is something that I believe in very much, really, which is love and compassion and empathy. And the strange marriage between that and globalisation and social media. How can you mend the communities and neighbourhoods that have been broken particularly since Thatcher? How can you stop people living and working more and more in isolation? How can you stop people thinking that there's space around them and working, which, I mean, I've got one of this and how useful it is for so much stuff, but neighbourhood and community have almost disappeared in the real meaning. Yes, so much they have. Old people live in isolation, families are broken down. The children spend more time, 90% of their time, indoors, being ferried backwards and forwards, and on the internet. They're not outside, they're not learning how to socialise. So how can you marry the two and make it work? Where is the empathy? How can you have empathy with somebody you don't understand? How can you love your neighbour when you don't even know who they are?
I hear everything you're saying, Pam, and I understand it. But again, I see everything you say, but I see something else as well. I see, you know, young kids that may be on the internet that have a sense of who play their games with people all around the world, and have a sense of internationalism and a sense of connection that, you know, I would never have had. You know, the the way in which we can know our locality now, the kind of institutions which can kind of form, you can find people locally, you can pin your thing on the map, on the Google map, and everyone can find who's interested in the same things so much easily, than in the past. The hall that you walk past, or the shop, or the room above the shop that you walk past a million times, you can find out what goes on in there now. That there's a club, or there's a society, or there's a group of people that are meeting and talking. That all sorts of people with all sorts of weird, different niche interests can now come together and share them and talk about them in ways that they couldn't do before. So you're right, it can be isolating, it can be individualising, but it can also be joining up and bringing together, because the cost of knowing, of knowledge, of communicating, of swapping information is now zero. It doesn't cost anything to know whatever's going on, because everyone's putting the information on for free and can share it and can connect up, and you just put a hashtag onto Twitter and then you're off trying to find a local group or a virtual group or a local group. So I hear everything you say and understand the worries about insecurity and anxiety and loneliness and all of that, which is there, but there's the opportunity for another side of it as well, which is humane and connected and joined up. So I think there are both things at once, and our job is to bring out the best bit and to accentuate and develop the best bit.
Okay, can I just come back on that? The generations are getting older, it's an ageing society, and I was in conversation with somebody in our village, and I stopped this person and touched her, and she said, "You are the first person," I did it in a friendly way, and she said, "You are the first person that I've had contact with that's actually been prepared to touch me." And then I gave her a hug, and she said, "Nobody has hugged me in so many months I can't remember. I live alone." And we're in an ageing society.
Funny lot in Honley though. You're right in slower. Touch you all the time.
So I think that needs mending.
I think one thing to say though about community, I think it's easy to be unaware how strong people feel about community and how there is still this sort of sense of pride in many communities in West Yorkshire. And Eddie, who was on the bar earlier on, who works for Kirklees Council, he went along to an event in Batley recently, which is a town that really has been on its uppers for a long, long time. And it was to launch a film about the community of Batley made by some local lads. And he said he expected about maybe 20 people might turn up, and it's 600. So
because you can bring those people together in a way that you couldn't do before. And let's get back to what can the vertical politics do to end the endemic of loneliness? Well, it could say that you can only work a 25-hour week. Could say that, so you've got the time to go and hug people or talk to people or visit them. It could say we could have not just a minimum wage or a living wage, we could have a basic income, which gives everyone the economic security to go and do the stuff that they want to do. There are things we can do if we want to make it happen, but we have to start with the conversation of what's the good society and what's the good life. The good society and the good life is where we have time to do that stuff, to be citizens, to be neighbours, to be parents and to be friends, the time to read your kid a bedtime story. Start with that as your manifesto, right? If you want to have the time to read a kid a bedtime story, then you've got to have the economic security, you've got to have the time, So build back from the things that make us human, the things that we want to do, and then we won't end up lonely and sad and on our own, and we will touch each other physically and emotionally and in all sorts of ways. It's doable.
Dave and then Barry.
Yeah, thanks. I'm David Griffiths. I'm a fairly passive member of Campus with a degree of unease about some of the recent directions of travel, I guess. And I just wanted to pick up 2 steps. I'm not responding to what Pam said at all, I'm afraid, but just to go 2 steps back to the UK Uncut reference and then to link that to what Tim was saying earlier, which I very, very much agreed with. Because I think the UK Uncut campaign was very inspiring. I absolutely agree with that. It was about firms not paying their corporation tax. And that's fine, but they weren't going to collect it, were they? You do need institutions that are going to collect the corporation tax as well.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that the balance of the discussion, you tried to address it, I think, Neil. I absolutely agree with Tim, that the perception of your opening remarks was very much came across to me as an either-orism. We're interested in the new politics, not the old politics, was the message I picked up as Tim did. And I think that's really concerning, because I think there are some really dull, old social democratic things that the state can do and we can't, which is things like taxation and redistribution and regulation. They're a bit dull and nobody's mentioned them in the room so far. But the state's going to do them and we're not, it seems to me. So there's an either-orism about state and non-state actors that troubles me. And even on the devolution question, there's again, it seems there's an either-orism there almost, because at a later stage, you and Paul both were saying really, it's much easier to do things with power close to home. But again, there's some things that's true of, there's some things that it isn't. We're
not saying we have our own army.
There's these debates about state or non-state, for one, and national, regional, local state for two, and should the state be a remote bureaucratic monolith, or should it be responsive and stimulate participatory initiative as well? They're three quite different debates, actually, it seems to me, and they are continually conflated, and I think it will be a real shame. I have had that, the same sense that Tim's had, not just in your opening remarks, Neil, but more generally in the direction of Compass recently. The Compass is going to either or for me in respect to some of those debates.
Okay, and that's really, and thank you, that's really helpful feedback for me. And I guess what I try and emphasise, or what I try and talk about, is what the predominant themes of our politics and our culture, and where do things tend to be going. And that isn't an either or at all. It's just saying that where is the culture leading us, where is technology leading us, what's the overall sense of direction. And I think the thing, clearly I see, I won't go back to the things I've said are what I see, but that doesn't mean to say that the state doesn't matter. And what's really good, and this is why, and I don't explain things very well, and I apologise. What matters to me about people from UK Uncut becoming involved in organisations like Compass is that they found out themselves exactly how narrow the silo is, that they can do that stuff and it can get in the papers, and they can do a brilliant job of beginning to change the national discourse about taxation, which is fantastic, but then they hit the buffers and find out exactly what you said. Who's going to collect the money? Who's going to distribute it? How's it going to be distributed? How do we make those big national decisions? So, in a sense, I'm really pleased that we're a way into that conversation for those sort of people that all of a sudden want big, joined up, broad politics, because they realise that that's what matters. And it's really important to me that we're an organisation, a bridge from those more siloed, individual, beautiful, wonderful campaigns into a much broader conversation. I don't think the good society is going to be created by all of us sitting around a campfire, holding hands, singing Kumbaya. There could be a little bit of that, but we absolutely need the state as well. Now, I think it's a less bureaucratic, less market, more accountable, participatory, democratic, where possible, devolved, but not always, because there are some things that have got to be done centrally and they've got to be done well and effectively. So I don't think we're actually in a different place about any of that, but forgive me that when I talk and speak, and some of the stuff from Compass is trying to say, where are the trends? That's what I think is important to identify, but it's definitely not either or.
Okay, got Barry and then the chap at the back after.
First, going to say how much I value both Neil's contribution and everybody else's that sat here in all. I'm from foreign parts from Leeds, you see, so I've learned a lot coming to these backwaters like this. I'll go now if you like. What I wanted to just mention briefly, because a lot I'd like to talk about, was why after the economic crash of 2008 we were so not ready to take advantage of that. And I want to sum it up very crudely by saying the dominant culture which Thatcherism and Reaganism and globalisation did, which divided the world and isolated us, and which they kept reinforcing with workers not shirkers, hard-working families, welfare claim, etc., etc. That divide and rule is still dividing and ruling. And I think we've got to find a way of talking a language, and I'm not saying people aren't trying to do this, I'm not trying to say I'm being original, that widens what we mean by political. I went to an event not so long ago where I talked about being a carer. I've been involved in politics for decades. I've never talked about my role as being a carer before. That was the very first time. And it's when Neal talks about bedtime stories, because being able to read bedtime stories is a political issue. Because we live in such an unbalanced society with such a concentration of wealth and power, and we lead such unbalanced lives that people can't do the ordinary. Or can't afford the ordinary. Take your kids out for a day. Well, can't actually afford that. So it's therefore how we now together learn to talk, A, to each other, and B, to that wider society, so they realise the things that bother them. Like the London citizens did. They didn't say, we want more money. They said, we don't have time to see our kids. Therefore, we want to earn enough so that we've got time to see our kids. It wasn't just grasping. It was an understandable thing to want to be able to do. So how do we find that? Learn together to find the language which means we can talk to everybody and start to build that fellowship, which I think, as you talked about earlier, which is you could find in the early labour movement, which was its strength, and rebuild it in modern times.
Yeah.
No, still agree.
Yeah. And sorry, I don't know your name.
David Parker, from Melton. I'm a member of Compass, and I was delighted when it opened up, because otherwise I could never have been a member of Compass. And I think the things that it does are very remarkable, and the things I've attended have been very positive and enjoyable. But I've also had that element of disquiet which was expressed 2 speakers ago about this tendency to emphasise, or appear to emphasise, because I know you backtracked a bit, about the bottom-up stuff, and to imagine all sorts of things on the basis of what you say are trends. But there are other trends at work, apart from all the bottom-up stuff, which are very welcome, and there's all sorts of remarkable things happening. I mean, I think 38 degrees is absolutely fantastic. It's edged power away from the political centre and the formal parties. But at the same time, we have supranational corporate bodies which can dictate to governments. We have globalisation. We still have an enormous amount of structures which are really absolutely top-down. And this is what makes people feel, alongside the things they're turning to positively, often so hopelessly alienated and powerless. I mean, that underlies so much of the feeling that politics doesn't serve them anymore, a sense of powerlessness. And that isn't something they've imagined. That is something real in their lives, and they know it and they sense it, even if they cannot see solutions to it. So there are other trends. And I thought, in a way, you shot your own rabbit when you made that very interesting comment about Thatcher and privatisation, because you linked in one sentence privatisation and cultural change, the way she used it as a way to change the way people related to each other and thought about each other. And there, in that sentence, you had a recognition of the nexus of power, of politics, and of economic power, and of culture. And we've not said very much about economic power at all evening. And if privatisation served the function which you ascribe to it, which I'm sure is absolutely right, you can reverse that. And you can say, we must have a much bigger public sector, not necessarily a top-down state-led public sector, but we must have a public sector which is based on solidarity and caring. And that, it seems to me, is one of those meeting points between bottom-up and top-down. But I really do share a bit the apprehensions of 1 or 2 people who've spoken that sometimes the top-down bit is getting slightly neglected.
Okay. I don't really want to come, so I can come here and say that actually I see Ed Miliband on a regular basis, and I'm pushing him as hard as possible. And John Cruddas, who's running Labour's policy review, is completely in tune with everything we're doing, and we're in tune with him, and we're trying to push him and help him and create the space and to do this stuff. I've clearly said that I think issues like, a shorter working week, basic income, PR, all things that will begin to change the landscape are things that national governments could do and must do, and we need them to do to open up the space for a more vibrant politics. So it's definitely both, so don't go away with anything other than that. But do not get carried away with the idea that it's just about Mrs. Thatcher, about a left-wing version of Mrs. Thatcher, right? Mrs. Thatcher was much a surfer on a wave as anyone else, who came off the back of 30 years of hard work of neoliberals from Hayek in 1948, where a group of them, much smaller than this meeting here tonight, sat and thought and worked out what they were going to do to make their world happen, right? They plotted, they planned, they organised. Nothing to do with Mrs. Thatcher. She was just at the tail end, happened to be there at the time. They worked, they set up think tanks, they got academics, they planted people in institutions and places all around the world. They're biding, Hayek said, don't go to the politicians. Create the ideas, create the organisations, and wait till they come to you. And then when they come to you, they'll take your ideas and they'll make them happen, like privatisation. And that's what I see about theory of change. How do you create the ideas in the organisation so that the politicians come to you at the right time to make the big things happen? I tell you, I've spent years wasting my time trying to make politicians do the stuff just because I say it's good enough. That doesn't work. You have to create the institutions, the culture, the power, the bases to make them happen. And that's what I'm interested in doing. And that's what Compass is about. That's what a whole load of other organisations are about. Not just demanding of the politician, but creating. They take the path of least resistance, politicians. Create the channels, the aqueducts, the viaducts, the ways of the water cascade, that's how I see them, cascading down the mountains. Direct them in the way that you want them to go in. And that needs ideas and organisation, and that's up to us to do that. Partly from the bottom up, partly working around them, sometimes a bit with them, but recognising that they will not go where we want them to go. They will not do things with ambition and imagination unless we create the spaces for that to happen. We are, as ever, we are the people we've been waiting for. We have to make this stuff happen. They will follow us, not the other way round. I completely agree that privatisation was a symbolic moment and a real moment in all sorts of ways. What's our version of that, and how do we make that happen? And Compass is in the middle of all of that stuff. The dream of a good society, the policies that will make it happen, the theories of change, the movements, the alliances, all of that stuff needs to come together. We're thinking, I was in Berlin last week with 18 other countries from organisations like Compass and Social Democratic parties, because we know it can't just happen at a national basis. It's got to happen at least a European basis. We're working on every front to try and pull this together and make it happen so that we're ready. So please don't go away with an idea that, we're either just in the centre, we're just at the periphery, we're in all of these places and all of these things, because they all matter if we want to make the leap to a different kind of society.
That would have been a very rousing finale. But we've
got one question. Do it again.
One more time.
We're all together now.
We are very fixed for the time, because Neil must get this 9:35 train to Wakefield. But one question with and perhaps if you could make your response the rousing finale. Also with a proposal for how we keep this discussion going. So please.
Yes, I felt like giving you a real round of applause then. Absolutely. I just want to give you some feedback to say that I did not hear you say either or. In fact, I almost heard the opposite of saying, what way do we go forward? We need to let go of all those ideas that there's only one way. And that if I'm in this group, you and I'm right, you must be wrong. If we're a we, then you must be a them. And so I heard exactly the opposite, that this notion about, if I win this battle, I'll just set you up to fight the next one, all made absolute sense to me. So it seemed to me you were saying you need to let go of those notions of either this or that, black or white, or there's only one way. We need to find the commonality amongst a variety of people, and that sense of the human condition, of harnessing that. And obviously out of that comes a lot of other things, and we also, I hear what other people are saying about the reality of the world we live in.
Yeah.
It's frightening,
Yeah.
but as a way forward, that what you're offering encourages me as a sustainable way forward to get out of this.
Yeah.
I win, you lose. I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
I can't talk to you because you not me.
Yeah.
That's what I heard you say.
Yeah. Thank you for that feedback, and that is what I wanted to sound like and feel like. And I see a world of amazing, marvellous complexity. And I know that the only way that we can help shape that complexity and make it better is through almost an equally complex set of ideas, thoughts, people. And the most important word in politics to me is a very short word. It's the word "and." It's not this or that. It's this and that. And through that, and you've said it much better than me. It's the sustainability bit, right? That I don't think that big change is going to happen necessarily really quickly, like 1945 or the neoliberal revolution or the Soviet Union revolution or whatever. I want a sustainable thing, because I don't, as I said earlier, I don't know what the good society looks like. I know it looks better than this, and I know life and politics is about a journey of keeping on moving towards something better and better. And I don't want a sudden, Labour government or any government, a coalition government, that just does something instantaneously and then loses again. I want to build up gradually over time the ideas and the institutions which can slowly, gradually, it'll happen faster and slower, but can move us on that journey to a good society. And I really think that we're learning how to do that. I think we're developing, human beings are developing the techniques and the cultures and the awareness. We're maturing as growing up, in the way that we see things. We need to do that faster. I'm impatient, but I also want to sustain it. Samuel Johnson said that great works are not done by brute strength, but by perseverance. It's our ability to persevere in this process of building a good society together, which seems to me the thing that matters. That wasn't as good as the last time, but I think that's actually a more important point about how we conduct ourselves and how we maintain ourselves and how we operate. And that's been a fantastic conversation, and you said some brilliant things that made me think and challenge me about how I come across and how Compass says things and where it seems its balance are, and the things you said about what's happening here and your thoughts, and I've really enjoyed being here, and thank you very much.
Thank you.